This is Basic, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
A process where 12 different design firms came in and did 12 different versions of the packaging. And those of us who'd been around for a while were just kind of sitting back and going, what is going on here? I don't understand any of this.
I'm Kevin Savitz, and this is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. Jim Inscore was hired at Atari in 1981 as a writer in the marketing department, then became documentation manager, where he managed writers and production staff to produce technical and consumer documentation for Atari computer hardware and software. This interview took place on December 9th, 2015. So it looks like you started in 1981, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I started in the fall of 81 and worked there for a couple of years.
Great. Tell me, before you were hired, how you got your job, why other computer dabbling you had done, and tell me the story before you were hired.
Yeah, okay. All right. So my whole background, I've been thinking about this a little bit, but I was long interested in sort of alternative media, alternative technology, underground technology. And I remember like mid-70s or so, there was a whole movement of underground video and computer hacking and phone hacking and all of that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So I lived in Sacramento at the time, and I knew a few people who were could get on the timeshare systems at Sac State, or who knew how to kind of get into the phone system, and just kind of interested in those kinds of people and those kinds of activities. And I actually bought myself a little video recorder, a camcorder. Well, actually, it wasn't a camcorder; it was a Portapack. It had a separate half-inch reel-to-reel tape recorder and a fairly bulky camera, and I used to do that kind of thing. So, and then I moved to San Francisco and got a degree in broadcasting, television production, and then went to work in advertising for a while. First, I was working as a marketing person and tech doc manager in an audio equipment company called Orban Associates. And then after that, I was at Pacific Stereo doing manuals for their proprietary brands and also advertising and store brochures and those kinds of things. So, and I had long had an interest in working at Atari and had tried several times to find positions first in video computer system when that came out, but then later as the computer came out, I was interested in, and I just kept looking and kept trying, and eventually an opening came up it was actually a writer in the marketing department, but working on kind of manuals for and other collateral for the computer system. So I went to work there in early fall of 81. And my manager, Joel Miller, he'd industry vet. He'd been around for a while. He had managed technical documentation and marketing communications for various companies. He'd been at Zilog for a while, which is where Roger Batisher, the president at the time of the home computer division, worked also. And I think Roger brought Joel over. And then Joel was trying to put together a really consumer-focused documentation and design group, and kind of really express the Atari computer in terms of consumer uses, consumer needs, and it was the same kind of divide that there frequently is in companies where the engineering department was, basically in charge of doing documentation for the computers, and the marketing department was really supposed to leave that stuff alone and just tend to marketing. But so we started trying to do some alternative stuff when I first started there. And somehow or other, it didn't go over well, although we ultimately ended up being responsible for all the documentation and packaging and other collateral that came with the Atari home computers.
What kind of alternative stuff do you mean? And and why didn't it go well?
Well, so the engineering department had a real engineering mentality, and so they had a very, this very boilerplate style of documentation. And we wanted to do documentation with more graphics and more design and more fun. And so that just created an internal conflict. They didn't want to change the way they were doing things. They felt they were being serious about the business and that we were being frivolous. And we felt like, well, it's a home computer. It's not an industrial product. It's a product for people to use at home. So that was, and we did things like, the first manual I worked on was for a thing called Atari Bookkeeper, and we kind of worked on the whole interface for that program to make it. We color coded paths, and we sort of streamlined the way that you perform tasks. And then we created documentation that showed these paths and color-coded and tried to walk people through things. Now, that would have never happened in the engineering group. The other thing we did was like for Eastern Front 1941, when it was released as an Atari product, we did a whole little booklet that came with it, and the designers went out and did research on the images to go with that time and that particular battle and confrontation. And then the writer on the project, who I hired, had been in the cartoon business for a while, doing graphic novel sorts of things. And so he, had a real strong narrative sense and was able to put together more of a storyline than a cut and dry, do this, do that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Cool. What other documentation did you work on?
I worked on those are kind of the main pieces. Once I became tech writing manager, my main job was to hire people to do, really good creative work. And so I managed a group of probably 6, 8, maybe 10 writers who came from different backgrounds, like me, like the advertising business, or from, like I said, cartoons or graphic novels, people who had a strong sense of tying narrative to visuals, and so that the text and the graphics would work together. And then we worked with, I had a peer, John Haig, who hired a bunch of designers from, leading agencies, and they worked on the graphics along with us. So there was a real hotbed of very creative development going on in that group at that time, and that was, as long as Roger Batisher was there and his folks were kind of okay with what we were doing, we seemed to have some grace.
Awesome. And I understand you also did some work with Atari Connection magazine?
Yeah, so that was another part of that creative hotbed I was talking about. Mm-hmm. Ted Richard, who came to work maybe about the same time, either a little bit before, I think just a little before I came to work at Atari. He was hired by Sally Bowman in marketing communications to put together the User magazine. And Ted's background, again, was comics. He'd done, 40-Year-Old Hippie, Dope and Dan, several others, and, was really well connected on the comics scene. But when he came in, he wanted to put together, similar to what we were doing in documentation, a very, highly graphic, consumer-oriented, but, technically sound magazine for both Atari computer users and, programmers who hobbyists and people who, wanted to get into Atari Basic or Atari language, other languages. And, so it was a really, interesting opportunity. And so I wrote several articles, game reviews, and I can't recall exactly some of the other things I worked on, but there was an ongoing relationship. And as I said, I had a group of writers, so all of them kind of pitched in to help Ted out because it was a good relationship and, sort of mutually supportive.
Nice. You said that an email that you and Ted used to carpool to work?
That's right. Yeah, it was a trifecta because my friend John Haig, who was the design manager I was talking about before, he moved to San Francisco from New York about the same time, or maybe just a little after I started at Atari. And he was actually recruited into another group at Atari. During the time that the reorg took place, that our group basically took responsibility for all documentation. Then John came in, and he was managing the graphics team. So he went out and recruited, serious pros from the various studios here and across the country. And so he and Ted and I would carpool together. We'd be kind of like, similar minds, similar interests, and so we had a great time carpooling for a year or so. That was a wonderful group.
I find it interesting that you said on the Bookkeeper that you guys had input into the actual program, because so often I think with documentation it's just like, okay, here's the program, it's done, write the manual. But you guys got to do some feedback before it was complete to make it an easier to use program. Did that happen very often?
I can't recall other situations at Atari specifically where that happened. And yeah, I think it was unusual, although I think for whatever reason, it was an independent company that was working on the software, and they were real open to input, and they didn't seem to have any of the usual sort of concern about interference or meddling or whatever. They felt that it was part of the development process. So I appreciated that. I believe we did have an outside writer working on some of the content for that particular product, and he seemed to get a lot of respect and appreciation from the team that was doing the engineering. So yeah, that was pretty unusual. I've had similar situations in other companies I've worked at more recently. Some companies seem to be more open, or some engineering cultures seem to be more open. So I always appreciate it when it happens.
Nice. All right. What else? What other things did you work on that I don't know about to ask about?
Well, I was there for 2 years or so, and most of the most creative work we did was during the first year I was there. And during the second year I was there, things started to go south. Roger Batisher left the company. John Cavalier came in. He replaced all the people in marketing with his own people. They started, being concerned about the cost of certain things. And although I guess the one project that just sort of jumps to me is like the indication of the change is around the Atari 1200 XL. Because they were starting to get in a panic about the cost of the Atari 800 and 400, and they were trying to get that thing out as fast as possible. But one of the projects we were involved in was they decided they needed to make it real consumer friendly right down to the packaging, and so there was a process where we had 12 different design firms. This is from above, mandated. 12 different design firms came in and did 12 different versions of the packaging. And those of us who'd been around for a while were just kind of sitting back and going, what is going on here? I don't understand any of this. And,
Wow.
In the end, it blew up. But it was just an interesting phase of the company, before going down in flames. The other project I worked on that was fun was we did a version of a manual for Pac-Man for the Atari 800 or the 800 400, and we kind of we just played on the theme of Pac-Man, and we did all kinds of things with like little like the blurb for getting started. My boss Joel wrote, and he wrote it as kind of like a boot camp call to order, attention troop, and the illustration that we threw in, showed these lines of little Pac-Man in uniform and that sort of thing. I did a little thing about sort of little rhymes about how the goblins behave in different modes, and I had a page with a maze and little poetry snippets here and there, and that sort of thing. We just played with stuff. Unfortunately, that didn't go over well with corporate marketing because they had very strict rules about how to use it. Pac-Man and his likeness, and so we ended up getting busted seriously for that.
Well, specifically on that manual, I mean, I appreciated when I was a kid and playing the game. It's one of the few games that we actually purchased. That the manual was like, had this chart was really clear. Like, on this level, nugget value is 500, and the Pac-Man speed is this, and the fastest ghost goes this fast, and the goblins stay, they are blue for exactly 1 second, whatever. It's just like, it was, I don't know, it was more information than you might get from most games, and it would maybe allow you to plan your game better, to become a better player, having this information.
Oh, cool. Yeah, good. That's what we wanted.
Well, good. What haven't I asked you that I should have?
Let me think if I can think of anything. I like I said originally, I was always interested in technology and the arts. I guess that's the one thing about it. It's like the main reason I wanted to go to work at Atari was because of the graphics and sound capabilities of the Atari 800, and I got to hang around with cool people who knew how to use that stuff, and got to meet Chris Crawford, and got to kind of know some of the details, and actually used to sit around drawing little pixelated character sets just to kind of think about projects that I might want to work on. And it was really my first introduction career-wise to deep tech, and I've managed to sort of leverage that into a long career of working on really cool tech projects, both technical and creative. And so that's the main thing I take away from Atari.
Nice. What do you do today?
I'm actually retired. My previous job, I actually got back into the game business after working for a bunch of different companies. I worked at Sony PlayStation for 8.5 years and managed a technical documentation group that worked with the worldwide studios to do developer documentation, so software APIs and tool documentation for game building tools.
Nice.
And I retired about 6 months ago. So,
congratulations.
Thank you.
I think I have what I need, Jim. Thank you very much.
Okay, good to talk to you.
If you enjoyed these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.